6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
How about we do it again?
6, 7, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think I followed it.
Okay, let's try one more
I
time.
definitely
Ready?
I can move you. Making review. Making review.
Say 6,
6,
5.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to the episode 215 of Rankn N Rankn Review versus Marvel yet again. Skye Brandon, bless his heart, returns to help me talk about 6 cinematic Marvel Universe movies, including the 2-part epic Infinity War saga and some new Spiderman, some new Ant-Man, and some and standalone films for Captain Marvel and Black Widow. So you've got that to look forward to this episode of Rankn Review. You can send your feedback to ranknreview@gmail.com. That's ranknreview@gmail.com. And the website is, as always, ranknreview.ca. The .ca is because I'm up here in Canada. If you need something else to plug into your ears, I advise you to check out the Terror Table podcast and the Shelf Shedding Movie Show. This is your host and writer, Canadian Larry Parsons, saying thank you so much for listening. Now let's talk some Marvel. Skye Brandon is back on the podcast to talk about Marvel, and I'm super happy about it. Thank you so much, my friend.
We did it. We finally have done it. The next batch.
Congratulations also on Shakespeare in the Saskatchewan and Iago Speaks and all of your good theater work. I wish that I had better timing on when the podcasts were dropping so I could plug you guys. A lot of the times it would be too little too late to plug it now, right?
Yeah, it would be. By the time it airs, we'll be done. But I could plug at Persephone Theater. Joshua Beaudry, who I'm sharing the stage with now, is getting to direct Stones in His Pockets, the play that I was in along with our friend Nathan Howe that got the pin pulled on it because of COVID.
Right.
Persephone Theater has held on to the set, and they told us we're going to try to make it happen at some point, and so we're the first show out of the gate this season. So
congratulations.
Mid-September to the first bit of October, if people are listening to this around that point in 2022, Stones in His Pockets finally gets to see the stage at Persephone.
Justifiably. That's exciting, man.
Yeah. I'm pretty happy for Josh that his directorial main stage debut is going to get to see the light of day.
Yeah. Well, he's just been doing good work. Well, you guys have both been doing good work for a long time. It's like he's more than earned it. So, but we're here to talk about Marvel, and I know we've done this before a couple of times already, but before we get into this next group of 6, I thought I would bring up 2 things that are of concern to me as a Marvel fan, generally in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that I do think is going to come up in the next 6 that we're talking about here.
Okay.
Because death doesn't really matter in comic books, should death matter in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Would be the first question that I would hit you with. And to bombard you with it. As the Marvel Universe continues to expand, and it is, like you were saying, we practically have another 6 good to go right away here as soon as the new Black Panther movie comes out.
Yeah.
Are endings important to storytelling? Again, I know they're not necessarily in the world of comic books, but as a viewer, do we get worn out if it really comes to seem like there is no real end to things? So those are my two my two philosophical attacks at Marvel here.
And very good questions, and yes, well timed too. Because you're right, like comics have been around long enough, and I think I've said this before, like the kind of soap opera thing where it kind of has happened years ago, but also in the near past, because time is kind of this crunch thing, because you get one issue a month, so a 12-issue arc, or quite often some arcs last 6 issues, and it could be a matter of days in that arc, but of course it just took you half a year or a year to read that story. So like all of a sudden, right, it's like, oh yeah, this character is still this age, but now they're making pop references in the comic to things that are current now, not when it
started. Yeah.
But not when it started. And so all of a sudden, like the character that did die, they then brought back, and then as they're doing now, you open the door to a multiverse, and then even if they did die, it's like, well, that person might be dead in that reality, but there's still this thing over here. So I think if it's done right, a death of a character will still have weight and will resonate with an audience, or viewer, or reader. Just how often you go back to that well.
Yeah.
I think would be, yeah. Because there's got to be stakes. Because if you don't feel like there's stakes,
it certainly matters less if you know that the Loki TV series is coming right away, right?
Yeah.
And again, in the actual world of comic books, it seems to bother me less. But in this modern blurring of like TV and cinema, which is everything's got to be part of a cinematic universe. It's never just one movie anymore. It's starting a trilogy, or it's starting like a branching of many, many movies. And I love movies, and you know that I support the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But I sniff a problem here. Also, as much as I enjoyed Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, kicking down all of these multiverse doors continues to dilute things, right? We're going to see time travel, we're going to see the afterlife, we're going to see all these new things starting to happen. And I remember in comic book world, when it became too crazy and spronging in too many directions, that's when things like Crisis on Infinite Earth happened, and they hit the reset button. But even at that, it's never an ending. And I think that as much as I compliment Marvel for hitting so much things out of the park, I think the one thing that they are going to have trouble solving is making death matter. And the fact that, I mean, without announcing an ending, like if they decided that, I can't see why, because it's a license to print money, but if they decided that phase 6 or whatever was the end, and they could like glide it in for a very specific landing, that would be great. But that's just not the world you and I are living in, Skye. As long as there's money to be made off of this property, it's just going to keep going. We might just have to count ourselves lucky that we were here for the beginning.
Yeah, agreed.
And I guess we can start addressing the death when we actually get to the death in the reviews. But is there anything you wanted to say by way of introduction before I list off the movies we're reviewing and we get started?
No, let's do it. Let's jump in.
All right. Well, we're going to do Avengers Infinity Wars, and we're going to do Ant-Man and the Wasp, Captain Marvel, Avengers Endgame, Spiderman Homecoming, and we're going to finish with Black Widow. Thank you so much for doing that.
Homecoming or Far From Home?
Oh, pardon me, Far From Home. I misspoke. That's why you're here, to bail me out when I drop the ball like that. All 3 of the Spider-Man trilogy now, I guess, have home in the title, just to mess with people like me, I guess. But you are correct. This is the one where they're having the European adventures. It's the European vacation version of the Spider-Man trilogy. Let's do it.
There was an idea to bring together a group of remarkable people.
To see if we could become something more.
So when they needed us, we could fight the battles
that they never could. what it's like to lose. To feel so desperately that you're right, yet to fail all the same. Dread it. Run from it. Destiny still arrives.
Evacuate the city. Engage all defenses. And get this man a shield.
Avengers Infinity War. Avengers Infinity War. What an epic undertaking this was. I guess Infinity War and Endgame were shot simultaneously, but they gave us a full year in between. And probably the most epic cinematic cliffhanger that I can think of.
I would agree. If there is something else from further in my past, I can't recall.
Certainly nothing immediately jumps to mind. Right?
Yeah. Like, who shot JR was still like a TV show, and you found out by the fall. You didn't have to wait like a full year.
No. And I mean, I remember going into it because I was a little bit more aware. I didn't know exactly how they were going to handle it, but I was pretty sure the snap was going to happen. I think the Nerdverse was pretty prepared. But I was worried for my boys, particularly my youngest son, taking all of this pretty personally. We're pretty invested. Like, how many movies deep is this movie now? Like, we've spent several days of our lives watching these superheroes at this point.
Yep.
So, I'm going to start out the gate saying that I do really, really like Infinity War. In fact, I will go so far as to say it's superior, in my opinion, to Endgame. But I do have a few problems with it, in that the first thing it does is remind me of the experience of going to the theaters in the early 90s and seeing Alien 3. In that I felt like all of the great work accomplished in Thor Ragnarok is completely obliterated in the opening sequence of Infinity War. Like, we establish in Ragnarok that Thor doesn't need his hammer to be powerful, that he doesn't need to have the home base to be the leader, he and Loki are reconciled. Like, all of that is completely obliterated, like, instantly. And it's not because they wanted to fuck with the Thor lore or anything like that. I think this was just a necessity of this is the story that's happening, and we got to set the table right now. We got to set the stakes right now. We've seen Thanos before, but now Thanos just beat the shit out of the Hulk, fucking killed Loki and Heimdall, the Idris Elba character, and half of the remaining scraps of Asgard. And we haven't even rolled credits yet on Infinity War. It's shockingly dark. Shockingly dark. And as much as part of me says good on you for like going there, I wonder how the younger kids in the audience took it. If it was tough for me to watch at times, like, I wonder if they might have like maybe pushed it a little bit too far. But that said, once the actual mechanism of the plot starts kicking in, and we start slowly realizing that Thanos is the protagonist of this movie, then we start seeing the shape of what is happening and inevitably taking shape. You just can't help but take the ride and be impressed at all of these puzzle pieces coming together. Yes, necessarily they had to throw some to the side and get rid of them, but on like the balancing act is completely amazing, and it's redemption for Ultron. That's where I'm starting.
Right. Yeah, I think they made a really smart decision early on, but I think once they realized what the Russo brothers could do, starting with Captain America: Winter Soldier, like, just because some of those movies kind of were introducing characters beyond Cap anyways. Like, they're kind of becoming mini Avenger movies, because you're going to get, you had Falcon, you had Black Widow, you had all this, these other moving pieces a part of it. So it really felt like they were auditioning for this without maybe knowing that they were actually auditioning for this project.
They were the right guys for the job, though.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also a testament to their work on these ones to then be able to maintain the tone of some of the other characters that are in their other movies. Can they come into this big ensemble movie and not lose it? And I would argue that that is the case. The Guardians still felt like the Guardians. We don't get to see Hawkeye and Ant-Man in this one, and so I'm kind of jumping the gun a little bit. But when we do get to see some Ant-Man in Endgame and stuff, it still feels like the banter and some of the stuff jives with those movies. So even though those movies totally feel different, I don't feel like they feel out of place in these big ensemble movies, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, and the Thanos angle is very interesting. I think this is the first time we've seen the villain as the main character in the movie. And not only that, he's successful. Yep. There is a fan theory or debate that rages on, was Thanos right? Is Thanos, less of a complex, or is he a more complex villain? We always complain about Marvel villains. My position is that he is not a very complex villain. I think that that's the story that he sells himself, but in the end, he wants to be the guy that does this. It's a power trip. He's completely abusive to his children. He enjoys the killing. He's just bad, right?
Yeah, I agree. Because everyone's like, well, he makes a good point. Like, there's not enough for everybody. I'm like, well, if you got a fucking magic glove with 6 stones in it,
you can make enough for everyone.
Make enough. Like,
yeah.
There's your alternative right there. And you don't make enough. You decide to get rid of half the population of living things. I'm like, that's not. Yeah.
So some people feel like, it's a win, and this is not a win. This is rock bottom for as far as our heroes go in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And terrible things happen throughout the film. But do you agree? Do you think they went too dark for the kids? Were they maybe aiming too much at you and I and not enough at our kids for this episode?
I hadn't really clocked it. And, it's been a few years since that one came out now, and my kid was a little bit younger. They seemed fine with it, but not that all kids were. I think because, jumping to the end, because a lot of the character deaths, if you will, were like the snap, the dusting, drifting away. It's a really more kind of cinematic way for a character to disappear than some kind of heroic, some kind of bloody death or something like that.
Right.
So apart from maybe Loki being choked to death by Thanos right off the top and stabbing Thanos or Heimdall, apart from those ones, a lot of the other ones are just kind of like they just drift away. So it can be shocking, but it didn't feel gratuitous because it's this mystery that everyone's trying to figure out what's going on.
And I think even as a young...
all those characters died and it was like a battle and they were like physically like that might be a bit much, but...
It's true, but I think even as a young kid, I would have been troubled by it a little bit, and I would have hated having to wait a year to see the rest of it, but there's no way I would have believed that Spider-Man was gone forever. There's no way that I would believe that Doctor Strange is gone forever, right? Like,
Black Panther was just like been their first Academy Award nominated film.
No, we're gonna scrap.
The game was like, who is gonna get dusted? That was like the shock to me. Like, oh wow, those are the ones that they picked, and then it set the table for a year of me asking questions of like, well, this will be interesting dynamics between these characters. How's this going to work if that's who's left? And
well, they're trying to get us back to the core Avengers again, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. You kind of knew that the original 6 had to be there,
which is smart, which makes sense. But having people snapped out of existence is one thing. But I remember coming out of the theater thinking, okay, I'm not necessarily worried for anybody who was snapped, but Gamora and Vision are dead. Yeah. And again, we get an end run jumping to Endgame for Gamora, but it's a different timeline Gamora.
Yeah, and the same thing with Loki now too at the show. So like Loki did die.
Yeah.
It just them meddling with the timelines opened up a possibility for the sidestep.
That we can still go on forever. And a lot of things that I haven't been talking about. I've sort of been focusing on the darkness, but the action sequences.
Yeah.
There's a main henchman, this evil alien wizard guy that causes all these problems, and a great sort of demoralized Hulk being unable to transform. So Banner not being any help in that particular fight. And that wizard, I can't remember the character's name, that villain. But
Ebony Maw.
Yeah. He doesn't have a lot of screen time, but they sure make you hate him quickly. And he is pretty good at fighting everybody, and he's very casual about how he does his moves, and like right away, deep into this movie. And it does just seem to pile action sequence upon action sequence, and you know, as is necessary for the Avengers movies, there's the Guardians of the Galaxy, hooray! There's, you know, the Black Widow. There's, you know, everybody gets their own little entrance and gets their own little beat to play. We sort of see where Vision and Wanda are, and unfortunately the very tragic end of that relationship. And again, it does seem to be the apology or the redemption for Ultron, whereas in Ultron we had the birth of Vision, and in this one we have the destruction of him. But there's a lot of things I can pick on, right? I can say that Thanos is not as complex as they're trying to say, and I can say that the movie's too dark, but it's 2.5 hours of pure escapist entertainment, and it absolutely works.
Yeah, and they use the ensemble to their advantage in that they don't dwell on any one group too long. Like, that's why the movie always does not... They never feel long to me, because you get the right amount of time with a certain set of characters before they move on to the next bit to get you caught up with what they're doing. Like, the only thing I could maybe kind of go, maybe that feels like a bit stretched out, like Thor, right? Like okay, like his story in terms of there's a big gap there for a while. Like, how long does it take them to make this bloody new weapon? And what's going on? What's the timeline of, like, when did the dwarves in Nidavellir make the gauntlet? Because you see the mold, but he seems to have had this gauntlet a long time, because they were like dropping it in end credit scenes in movies way earlier. Like, so like some of that stuff I start pulling it apart and get nitpicky. I'm like, Skye, just watch the movie. Enjoy it.
And again, another instance of Thanos being too evil, in my opinion. He lies to the giants, kills all of them, and then destroys the remaining giant's hands so that he can't forge any more weapons for any future Thanos. It's all vanity. It's all arrogance. So, and certainly, even with Thor withstanding the might of a sun, focused energy of the sun, it was less interesting than everything else that was going on in the movie.
But I will say, and they have another great one in Endgame, but when Thor arrives on the field of Wakanda with Groot and Rocket, like, I couldn't help but get shit like, that's a freaking entrance. Amazing.
Oh, you guys are in trouble now.
And then they, true Marvel fashion, right, they're able to undercut it in just the right way. We're having a little banter about their beards between Cap and Thor, right? They find these little comedic yet relatable moments between two friends who haven't seen each other in a really, really long time, and it's just, they just drop it in. I love it.
And it was good to see that Wakanda played a pretty pivotal role in the battle. Obviously, we are sort of cheated in that. I haven't seen obviously Wakanda Forever, but I get the feeling like they probably had plans for Black Panther that necessarily had to change with the death of their star, and so getting to see him focused prominently in this movie. Black Panther leads the charge, Wakanda Forever. I mean, I'm glad it's there.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Is there anything else you want to say about Infinity War before we move on to the next chapter? I know it's a big movie. It seems like it needs a big conversation.
The only thing too, like, I love how, you know, in terms of like that idea of it being Thanos' movie, and if there was any doubt, I love how, like, often right at the end of these Marvel movies it'll say, you know, the Avengers will return, or Ant-Man and the Wasp will return. Well, at the end of Infinity War, Thanos will return. Like, that's what the Russos put in. It didn't say the Avengers, it said Thanos.
Very briefly, as it turns out.
Yeah.
I do some dumb things, and the people I love the most, they pay the price.
Thanks to you, we had to run. We're still running.
Let's go.
Maybe you just need someone watching your back. Like a partner.
Hold on. You gave her wings and blasters.
So I take it you didn't have that tech available for me?
No, I did.
Ant-Man and the Wasp, directed by Peyton Reed, is not the movie that everybody wanted to see right after Infinity Wars, because the cliffhanger, oh my god, what's gonna happen? And meanwhile, before any of that happened, we're gonna have this standalone Ant-Man and the Wasp adventure that largely has to do, well, there's two things. It's sort of a new tech adventure, similar to the first one, and the attempt to rescue Michelle Pfeiffer's character, the original Wasp, from the microverse, is it? Or what is, is that what we're calling it?
Yeah, micro, yeah.
So those are the two things that are going on, and with that we have two different villains. We have this woman who's been stuck in phase and is in terrible pain because of it, and will do at this point anything to get out of that situation. And we have, and I think, as much as I love the actor, a kind of wasted Walton Goggins as a guy who's trying to get his hands on the PIM technology for nefarious reasons, and who is willing to, you know, hire thugs and do all these other things. I sound like I'm being negative about the movie. The thing is that I think the movie is fine, and it's, in a way, a wise thing to take a breath before we move forward in the Marvel Universe. I'm just pointing out, at the time when we were watching this movie, like, we were all coming off of Infinity War, and this felt sort of, by contrast, kind of slight. Evangeline Lilly gets to step up front a little bit more and participate in the action, which is good to see. And I love how they really make benefit of the abilities that Ant-Man has to rapidly change size, and how that could be incredibly helpful when it came to hand-to-hand combat. The movie completely works. It's, in a weird way, kind of an industry-stamped, dependable, this is what a Marvel Cinematic Universe entry looks like. And it's very good, but I don't know that it stands out in this particular crop of movies. Paul Rudd is funny and sarcastic, just like he was in the first one, and Michael Douglas is well-worn and comfortable as an old pair of shoes as the original Ant-Man. And, you know, it was good to see Lawrence Fishburne kind of folded into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It seemed inevitable, but here he is. But I walked away liking it, but not loving it. Is it me, or is it my reaction?
No, I don't think it's you. I would probably, repeat everything you just said. Like, I enjoy it. I enjoy watching the movie. I can rewatch it easily. It feels like it's the setup for other stuff. It's definitely that mid-movie for what they hope to be a trilogy, which we now know is happening, but also part of, like, the Avengers movies that were yet to come. Because, like, you know, we don't know, like, Grogan's character, what was his name, Sonny, something, whatever. We don't know who he works for. So, like, for me, like, that's something that we're, like, okay, being angled at that. So who does this who's this guy's higher up, and Ghost.
Ghost.
It's clear they're kind of like trying to redeem her by the end, and just knowing now, like, Thunderbolts has now been announced as like an upcoming project. So I'm like, well, okay, are they gonna give her some more time in the Thunderbolts? I'm glad. Yeah, the Michelle Pfeiffer stuff was great. I had no doubt ever that they were gonna like find her, because like you got Michelle Pfeiffer in the movie.
Yeah.
You're gonna find her.
Yeah, we just hired her so she could die in Michael
it-
Douglas's arms, and then that was it. Yeah, no.
Yeah. Now you may say, but Skye, in the mid-credit scene, they all got, snapped and turned to ash. I thought that was a good cliffhanger.
Yeah.
In that Ant-Man just happened to be in the quantum realm when it happened, so there's this straight kind of discrepancy where they think he's gone, but he's just trapped someplace else. But again, it was never a matter of like, well, maybe not all of them are going to come back in the next movie, but something's going to get solved.
Yeah. Well, and
I love Jimmy Woo. I love like the back and forth between Randall Park and Paul Rudd.
yeah.
And Michael Pena, like every time they get to make an Ant-Man and Wasp movie, he has to have a montage where people lip sync his dialogue. Like
It's weird because you'd think that we would tire of his like little Ocean's 11 wisecracking crew, or like that, like they'd get either written out or killed off or something. But I always welcome their presence. There's a
and
good.
I guess maybe that's like them knowing the assignment, and Peyton Reed just being clear, and so yeah, like I like it, but I think you're right. It's not going to stack up well against some of the other ones in this list, just because of what else is in this list.
The other argument here is, again, going into the comic book world, is that there are standalone issues of comics, and there are issues that are part of the larger narrative. And this is a completely decent standalone adventure for Ant-Man. And it's nice for Marvel to have more of those, because they're becoming less and less, unless it's an origin movie, there's not a lot of really clean entry points into Marvel anymore. I think you could watch this having not seen the original Ant-Man, or largely any of the other Marvel movies, and you'd get it. There's this technology that can make you really big or really small, and this guy wants to get his wife back, and this woman is trying to solve this weird sci-fi predicament she finds herself trapped in. Ghost. I like the concept of that character in Constant Phase. Again, it would seem like a great ability and superhuman quality and all these things that you could accomplish, but this side effect of being constantly in terrible pain, what would that do to you? I think that's really nice. And it's nice to have this sort of nice soft bubblegum landing after the darkness of Infinity War. And I also noticed, because we didn't have any Ant-Man in that movie, in Infinity War, he is a much warmer presence. Like, Stark, we like him, but he's kind of a dick, right? Doctor Strange, we like him, but he's kind of a dick, Banner, we like him, but he's usually kind of in the side corner, he's like a walking, talking special effect, so they use him more sparingly. What I like about Ant-Man is, like, he's relatable and likable in a way that the other guys aren't. Like, I guess I couldn't break into a house with the skill that he has, but I feel like I could have a conversation with Ant-Man in a way you couldn't with Tony Stark or with Stephen Strange, right? They're just so much better than you in every way that there's a relatability to Ant-Man, and I think it complements the smallness of the story. I said the same thing in the original movie, or the original Ant-Man movie. It's just a fight over new technology. They want to stop the Yellow Jacket from misusing the PIM technology, and that's basically all the story is. Yeah. And that's perfect. That's all we need that story to be. And I think that Ant-Man has been successful at sort of sustaining its own little corner of the sandbox and doing well within it. It's just crowded out by more interesting stuff here. So that's
And the last thing I would add too, I appreciate how by the end of the first Ant-Man, they've clearly set up the fact that like, oh no, they all get along now. He's cool with his ex-wife and her new beau, and that totally carries over to this one. It's like, it's refreshing to like see like, oh yeah, you're with my wife now, but we don't have to hate each other.
Yeah, I know you're supposed to be evil, and I'm supposed to be, constantly wronged. But I was in jail. I wasn't around to be there for my kid, and you were. So in a way, I guess I should be thanking you. No, and again, just the pure charm level. Like, he's under house arrest, so this whole adventure has to sort of take place without being seen by the other police, and the giant ant showing up again to act as his proxy in his house, and or all the different ideas that they worked in with the technology. Again, I didn't read a lot of Ant-Man comic books, so I don't know how much it's lifted, but the fact that the Michael Douglas character carries this entire office building with him, and he shrinks it and brings it back up, and like he's got a portable vacation home, he's got a tank hooked up to his keychain, there's limitless possibilities to this. They need to hook up more Avengers characters with this PIM technology.
And I love how, and I think this goes back to some of those original pitches, from what I have read and understand, just how important the Ant-Man stuff is. Like, not to jump the gun, but when we get to Endgame, like, that PIM tech is pivotal to everything kind of coming around and piecing together in that one too.
Yeah.
So I love how, it's just a stupid movie, some guy who like shrinks himself down to the size of an ant. It's like, no, it's actually a bit more complicated. Not complicated. It's a bit more nuanced, and it has greater importance than maybe what just a basic synopsis would appear to give at first glance.
Oh, absolutely. And it's true in other genres, this whole idea. I read the novel The Incredible Shrinking Man by Richard Matheson, and I had the memory of the movie and the guy being chased by the cat and fighting a spider, and that it was kind of cheesy or whatever. The book is quite chilling, because like he keeps shrinking and keeps shrinking and keeps shrinking. Like it stops being about him being able to fit into the house and starts being about him experiencing entirely different universes that are already all around us that we can't see. And the transition between fearing and being driven crazy by this scenario to kind of being forced to accept it, because what choice do you have? It's a much more imaginative area that they've kicked open here than it seems like, and they keep on kicking down these doors. Like, as Guardians of the Galaxy opened up the sci-fi space universe, and Doctor Strange opened up the supernatural wizarding world, and this opens up the microverse, and all of those universes have limitless stories that can be told in them. And this one was a fun, slight page turner, but it wasn't part of the overarching story, and it's it holds its place fine. Marvel hasn't dropped the ball seriously for me yet here. It's like, even though I was really mean about Ultron is an entertaining movie. It just has a lot of problems, and it's still an entertaining movie. But this is a really entertaining movie. It just, this is a fun romp. It's not a nail-biting, oh my god, I can't wait to see what happens next. And not every movie needs to be that, so great. Good enough?
Good enough.
So you're not from around here?
It's hard to explain. I keep having these memories. I see flashes. I think I had a life here. But I can't tell if it's real.
We have no idea what threats are out there. We can't do this alone. We need you.
I'm not what you think I am.
So next out the gate for the Marvel Cinematic Universe is Captain Marvel, directed by Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck. I guess there's 2 directors this time. That's interesting.
Yeah, I remember this. It got handed off.
I see.
Like one started and one finished.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'll say this about the movie. I didn't notice that. Like, there wasn't a piece of the movie that felt significantly better or worse than the other ones. The thought that immediately jumps to mind when I'm talking about Captain Marvel is, in the previous review, we were sort of talking about the template with the Marvel characters. And we seem to have a larger quota of smugness in our characters than we maybe need. Tony Stark, kind of an arrogant jerk, you know. Stephen Strange, kind of an arrogant jerk. Almost all of the characters communicate, you know, fluently in sarcasm.
Right.
So, like, Ant-Man, like, it was very much the funnier, lighter version of that. But I feel like Captain Marvel might be an overcorrection for this. I'm not as familiar with the comic book character of Captain Marvel, but, like, I get that this is, like, a universal being of huge, vast power. And I can't quite close my hand on her personality. It seems like before she's endowed with all of these powers, she is innately good at everything she does, and just a perfect, positive human being. And that trajectory kind of stays through. Whereas, like, I feel like Tony Stark learns a lesson in the first Iron Man, right? I feel like Stephen Strange is humbled by the when he can't use his hands in the original Doctor Strange. Captain Marvel, there's a few times she's on the ropes and she is learning how to focus and use these powers. But she fundamentally is the same person at the beginning of the movie that she is at the end of the movie for me. There is no arc for her character. She is just blandly good. All of her actions are blandly good, even unless she's being manipulated. And all of her skill sets, everything that she attacks, is just... she just succeeds. It doesn't necessarily hurt the stakes. It feels like they're just trying to do something different with her character. But that got muddied with the weird fan backlash to Brie Larson, who I do think is a really good actress. But I don't know if they didn't like her casting or if they just didn't like her. So there was all this weird baggage about the movie. And at the end of the day, I just want to sort of treat the movie as the movie. And I found her character less interesting, but I found that the world that this movie set up, with the Skrulls and these aliens that'll look just like everyone else, and the younger version of S.H.I.E.L.D., and, you know, Sam Jackson fairly convincingly de-aged to a way that it didn't distract me after the first few scenes. He sort of adjusted to it, and I like the ambition of everything around the movie. I think it's, like, successful in everything it's doing except for making me get who Captain Marvel is. We somehow got through the first Captain Marvel movie with me not really feeling like I grasped her. But did I have a good time watching the movie? I did. So that's where I'm starting. Like, again, another solid entry from Marvel, but clearly not top tier. It's, origin-itis. We've talked about this before in the past too. There's so much that they have to set up before the action kicks in that it feels a little bit stymied, a little bit knee-deep in mud. But it's necessary. You don't want to force it too quickly. So.
Yeah, I think it is a bit of a byproduct of trying to introduce a character and one that they want to play an important role down the road. How do you do it in a way that can also explain why this character hasn't been around yet? And also touch on, I think it's because we pick up the story, and it's a nice bit of a nice reveal that she doesn't know her past life, and so we don't get to see her other than like quick little flashback bits that she kind of pieces together or whatnot. We don't get to see her before the incident when she's infused with the power of cosmic and taken by the Kree. So we only see this kind of weird Kree version of her, and I wonder if in an attempt to play that, that's what you're kind of touching on in terms of I don't know what to make of this character. They don't seem to change.
Right.
I'm interested to see we'll see what happens in the Marvels movie that's coming up, the sequel. How much does she get back or retain from the previous life, if anything, and does that change her? But she's kind of similar in her few scenes with Endgame. But then that's a weird thing, right? Where, like, just from a technical standpoint, she was shooting scenes in Endgame before she even got to do her own movie. So she's kind of like, and it's not a bad job, but I think that's maybe why we're having a hard time sometimes putting our finger on what's going on here, because not just her, they as a team are like, all right, here's your pages for this movie. You haven't had your own yet.
Yeah.
You're trying to like retroactively figure it out.
So she's a test pilot, just to do a little bit of service of the plot. And Annette Bening is this mysterious scientist who's testing this new tech. There's an incursion with some aliens. There's an explosion, and now she finds herself being trained on another planet and doing all of these sort of superhero missions, but unknowingly to her, kind of on the wrong side of things. And like, I get that trajectory. I mean, I guess it was dismissive to say she has no trajectory. She does. You know, she figures out what's going on and she makes a choice for herself. I get that. I just don't feel like I know her. That might be a problem. I also think, and this might be a small thing, but I don't think that it is it's a huge anticlimax for me that is how Nick Fury loses his eye. In this movie, they have the reveal that he gets his eye scratched by this cat. Well, it's not really a cat, it's an alien, but they've been playing with that and setting that up, and he learned a long time ago that trusting someone can cost him his like, really? It was a cat? That was really? That was not a call that I would have made, you know?
I agree. And I actually also, and I don't know why it kind of maybe bugged me is even too strong a phrase, but like getting the picture of Carol Danvers getting into the jet and her call sign being Avenger on her jet, and that's what gives him the idea to call it the Avenger Initiative and call them that. Even that, I was like, I don't know, that just felt a bit shoehorned, like trying to retroactively increase the importance of this thing that we're just giving to you now. But if it was so important, why didn't we have it beforehand?
Yeah.
But I'm curious too, like there's so many possibilities, like getting to see Ronan the Accuser again before his version of what we would see in Guardians of the Galaxy. Like I wondered if like, oh, maybe the next movie will be like another thing in the past and just filling in that gap of, well, what was Captain Marvel doing out in space all those years when all this stuff was happening?
Which is very possible.
And I know I can't have my cake and eat it too, but the character that Annette Bening is playing, Marvel, who's kind of the original Captain Marvel in the comics. And I think that was a bit of like, oh, people were surprised because in the comics it's a male presenting character, and in the movie they kind of did a bit of a bait and switch and they made Annette Bening Marvel. Like so many interesting story stuff in those comics in the 70s and 80s about him that's like, oh, and then we just kind of, we don't get that. We don't get to see that version of Marvel.
No. Well, again,
whether it's Annette Bening or someone else.
I was just happy to see Annette Bening because I think Annette Bening is a really good and underused actress generally. And let's be real, she doesn't have a ton to do in this movie, but it's nice to see her. It was super nice to see Coulson again. Skrulls,
that was a nice turn.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, agreed. I was just going to add with the Skrulls, it was a nice turn because in the comics they're almost exclusively, not every single one, but they're almost always the villains.
Right.
Or like two sides of two bad guys. Like I think over the years it's kind of changed for like, yes, the Kree and the Skrull are kind of like, you know, how can you root for one side? They're both bad. Like it's very rarely when you see a Skrull that you would cheer for. So that was a nice little pivot that they've already done in this movie that I was not expecting. And just by introducing them now, we're going to get Secret Invasion, which is one of like the greatest comic arcs. And I think they're doing it by Disney Plus. They're not doing it in a movie. It's going to be a show, which makes sense. We'll see
who knows who
what
could
kind of version of Secret Invasion they tell us.
Yeah, but they can look like anyone else, which leads to fun scenes where it looks like Captain Marvel's beating the shit out of an old lady on a subway train, and,
Exactly.
which is lovely. But yeah, I can see them being potentially fantastic villains when you don't know who's who. It's like Marvel's version of like Battlestar Galactica. Who's the Cylon? Ah!
Yeah.
It's fun that it goes back to the 90s, even though the fact that 90s nostalgia is such a heavy thing these days makes me feel fucking old. But there's a lot of fun opportunities there, and they made good use of them. Like I say, I liked seeing Coulson again, and it didn't seem forced or over the top. Like, you understood that they had a long-standing relationship, just the way Fury reacted to Coulson's death. You knew, like, he was one of the boys, right? So it was nice to see that, and sort of it makes you more aware. Like, they're not tethered to anything. If they want to tell stories, they can go back in time. The X-Men did it. Marvel can sure as hell do it,
Yeah. And I appreciate, like, the 90s soundtrack music being laced in, and, like, the nice little shout-outs to Blockbuster and Radio Shack, and...
It does suffer from origin-itis. It's definitely not one of my favorites, but I feel the potential here. I feel like now that this one's kind of out of the way, I'm curious to see where it goes from there.
Yeah.
But that's what it is. It's more of a tantalizer. It's like it's a long, entertaining teaser of things to come. It's like a pilot episode. Now what?
And I guess that's the one thing we didn't quite touch on too, is at the end of Infinity War. That was like the end credit bit.
That's right.
Was the tease that Captain Marvel was coming too. So I think, and as I recall, the schedules as they do sometimes get shifted. Like, I do think at one point Captain Marvel was supposed to be the next release, right on the heels of Infinity War, similar to how Thor Ragnarok was supposed to go right into Avengers Infinity War, but they flipped it or something like that. And so Thor Ragnarok came before Black Panther instead of the other way around.
Right.
But it's not that important, really. Like, I can understand where, like, yes, I'd want that little teaser to be the setup for the next movie that comes out, but it's not that big of a deal.
You got the impression at the end of Infinity War, Sam Jackson sees disaster unfolding, half the universe disappearing, and he hits this alarm. It's like his oh shit switch. It's like a universal, the shit has hit the fan in a cosmic way. But one does wonder why he didn't hit that switch the first time the aliens attacked in New York, or when Ultron was taking over the world, or. And I think it's just a question you have to choose to not ask yourself,
Yeah. Because it's clearly just the byproduct of, like, this is how we're trying to just wedge this character into the backstory and the timeline of what's already been happening.
Well, and never undercut the ambition of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. What they have achieved, not even what they're attempting, what they have achieved is, like, really impressive. There's an awful lot of balls in the air, and to keep everybody straight, not just keep it straight themselves, but to keep your general audience on board for all of this, well played, gentlemen. Good enough for Captain Marvel, or is there anything else you want to...
No, I think that's good. Good enough.
God, seems like 1,000 years ago. I fought my way out of that cave. Became Iron Man. Realized I loved you. I know I said no more surprises, but I was really hoping to pull off one last one.
The world has changed. None of us can go back. All we can do is our best. And sometimes the best that we can do is to start over.
telling everybody they should move on. Some do, but not us.
Even if there's a small chance, we owe this to everyone who's not in this room to try.
We will. Whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes.
So we had to wait a long time. It was a little over a year, I think, between Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. And, they definitely made all of their money back, and they definitely deserve to make all of their money back. But I believe, as I said in Infinity War, I think that the first half of this epic Avengers adventure is, I think, significantly better than the second. Which is to not say that the second is terrible by any stretch of the imagination, but it doesn't have the same sort of narrative originality, and the second half is more dependent on, well, it's less clever. Little knots are tied in the plot, just racing by just to get through it, like Ant-Man being freed from the microverse by a rat, or like just people showing up because here they are now, we need them to be there now, doesn't matter how or why they got here, we just sort of move along. And I think the attempt at sort of matching the boldness of having the villain be the protagonist in the first half of the story in Infinity War is try and matched in the second one by the boldness of the time jump. Yeah. We open this movie and everyone's at ground zero of what's happened, and we need to find Thanos right now. We need to get those stones from him, and we need to fix this. And it just doesn't go the way they or we are necessarily expecting it to go. But nor do we expect the movie to be, resolved in the first 20 minutes. But I remember when it jumped, what was it, 5 years later?
Yeah.
5 years, yeah, that's what I thought. In the theater, there was a lot of people, you could hear go, whoa.
Yeah. Openly gasped.
That's
the audience that I saw it with, yeah.
That's significant. So this is not just a small thing, just beyond the initial fallout of half the world just disappearing, and all of the tragedies that would have fallen from that, all the planes that would have fallen out of the sky, all the, people trapped in bad situations, the world has been basically without superheroes or hope, and in a state of bleak depression. There's, I guess, an overabundance of resources now, but I guess that could have its own set of problems. But I guess when you get down to it, a bunch of miserable, fundamentally broken, beaten heroes is not the most fun, entertaining time at the theaters, right? Even when Ant-Man gets ejected out of the microverse, the first thing he discovers is half the world is gone, and that he's missed seeing his daughter grow up. And the laughs just keep on coming. And much like the first half, the gloves are off. Characters are definitively killed off in this installment, and some of that stings. But, I mean, there's a lot to talk about it, not to jump to the ending. For all of the, I think, pretty deliberate attempts to sack me emotionally towards the end of the movie, it was only one small scene, and to my surprise, it was Happy talking to Iron Man's daughter at the end of the film. That was the only thing that got close to making me feel a little dusty in my eyes while I was watching the whole movie, which I felt like the movie wanted me to be much more wrecked emotionally by the ending and these fairly major departures that happen in the films. But I do think they needed to clean house. I think that with the amount of new characters that they're introducing, it will become unwieldy after a certain point. And if you're looking for an endpoint, we talked about at the introduction of the show, does Marvel, can they have endings? This is not a bad endpoint. If you were to start with the original Iron Man and finish with Avengers Endgame, I don't think that the unfinished tethers of story would haunt your sleep. I think that it would feel complete enough to be satisfying. It is very successful, but it's 3 hours. Even by Marvel standards, it becomes a little bit unwieldy, and I don't know, it didn't have the emotional punch that it seemed to want to have for me, but I did really enjoy it. And I did enjoy watching it with my kids, and yes, they were happy to see normalcy relatively restored and their heroes back in the fray. And as far as a great cinematic payoff and a theater experience, when those portals start opening up at the end of and there's it seems like an army of amazing superheroes fighting an army of these aliens, it was very rewarding. So I'm not here to talk shit about Endgame, even though it sounds like I was pointing out all the it's definitely an epic, entertaining, escapist fantasy, and it ticks all those boxes. But as a comic book nerd, I have to point these things out.
I loved it. I was continually surprised in that I was not anticipating them to have Thanos use the stones to destroy the stones. That's something that's attempted in the comic books, but that the stones somehow don't allow that to happen.
Right.
So the fact that they made that a narrative thing, there you go. They just took that possibility off the table. And then it made for a very surprise death ending for Thanos. I was like, I was not expecting that at that joint.
Was I expecting Thanos to live through the movie? No. Was I expecting him to die in the first 20 minutes of the movie? No.
Also no. And I think, as we find out, they're willing to do that because they have a way that they're planning. They're going to go back and we're going to get a version of him anyways from the past. And then he gets some insight and realizes, oh, shoot, I'm going to have to be even more brutal than I was planning on being, because clearly they won't stay down, so I have to do something that will just... And we get that eventually where he actually states that's his new goal. He's just going to bring it all down to zero and start over, because clearly people will be ungrateful for the great thing that he's done for them.
Well, and his mask slips a little bit. Knowing that he was thwarted by these people, I think really pisses him off. When he has that little speech to Tony, it's like, I'm going to destroy this world, and I'm going to enjoy doing it. That's far from the noble presentation that he'd been carrying before this, right? This is not, I hope they remember you, and fucking condescending. No.
And to our question at the top, do the stories have ends? Maybe not the overall bigger story of this big, ongoing, sprawling, interconnected weave, but I do feel like they're able to do that with certain characters. So to your point with Iron Man, and I would argue too with Captain America, the Russos, along with McFeely and I'm blanking on the other writer because they're the tandem. Make sure I look it up while we're chatting. But what's so great about that is when they do Iron Man, he's a self-serving prick that makes the ultimate sacrifice by the end of this movie.
Yeah.
And Captain America is the guy who's always sacrificing himself. By the end, he's like, you know what? I'm going to take a little bit of something for me.
Yeah. And he earned it, man.
And he earned it, yeah. And by the two reversal of those two main characters who are kind of in this push and pull relationship throughout all these movies, I think is just a really great reversal flip payoff. It feels like, yes, you did those two characters justice by giving them that.
Yeah. And that I 100% agree with. But Tony Scudart cracking time travel by staying up one night and figuring it out was a little bit convenient.
Yes. But in the discovery itself, yes, but I love how then they play the reaction and I'm like, holy shit, I did it.
But
it wasn't like, I knew it. It was like, oh my god.
But it was a ballsy decision. They destroy the Infinity Stones but now they have to figure out how they're going to do this. So they have to do something equally ridiculous, right? And so Tony figures out time travel. But you're right. It was great seeing the reconciliation between Tony and Captain, and they both were given perfect exits from the universe, I think. More
as
interesting.
As I knew, I'm sure I'm not the only one, but I thought it was just great pairings of various characters that throughout the movie, like getting to have Tony and Nebula off the top.
Yep.
Was a really interesting duo. And then stuff that makes even more sense, like having
Hawkeye and Black Widow.
Hawkeye and Black Widow having to go to Vormir. You're like, well, one of them's not coming back, and they're great friends. So which one of them is it going to be?
And they've been setting it up to be Hawkeye really hard.
Yeah. And at that point, rumors were already kind of coming out that there was going to be a Black Widow movie. And it's like, well, I guess it's going to be say goodbye to Hawkeye. But
I kind of went into it, it goes without saying, especially this movie opens on Hawkeye, and his entire family has vanished before him. And it's brutal as I talk about the darkness and the heaviness of the movie taking away from the fun. And then he spends that 5 years killing people that he felt were unworthy of surviving the snap. And so he is broken. He is not a hero anymore. He's a vigilante, and he's a murderer, and he's gone to this dark place. So, yeah, I was like, I would have bet a pretty substantial amount of money going into that movie that he was not going to survive. And no, they kill Black Widow, and it was, I think, the most surprising moment of the entire film for me. Because it was Scarlett Johansson, who was, very bankable for them. And yes, I had heard that there was going to be a Black Widow standalone. I didn't realize at that point that it was a prequel, obviously. But still, I just assumed she was pretty safe.
Yeah. Apart from, saying, other bits, I also love, I think I may even have alluded to this when we talked about some of the other movies early on, because Marcus and McFeely are the two writers, and they've done some other stuff. And I loved how they're the ones that wrote Thor: Dark World, and I love how they you didn't like our Thor sequel?
Oh.
Well, we're going to make it pivotal to one of the parts of Avengers Endgame in terms of them having to go back at the point, and so Thor gets to see his mom one last time. And I just love how, whether it was conscious or not, it's this great artistic middle finger to but we're going to make it important in retrospect, and this is why you had to watch that movie.
Well, and people complain about fan service, and this movie has fan service. It's all about fan service. But much like Captain America earning his sort of selfish choice at the end of this movie, Marvel and its audience, this many movies into the franchise, we earned all of these payoffs. They earned all of these payoffs. So I will allow it. I think in another...
I will not lie. I was geeking out in the theater. I think that's why this one is so high for me. Obviously we're not having to worry about spoilers because we're talking about bloody movies. But when Cap picks up Mjolnir, I just lost it. When he gets to fight Thanos, shield and hammer, I was like, "Oh, I'm here for it. I'm here for it." But then I loved that it still wasn't enough, and that he just kept getting up and was willing to keep fighting. And then we finally get the Avengers assemble, but it's not the big yell. He just says it, low key under his breath. I was whispering it along. So this one's got a special place in my heart, just because it's the teenager who collected comic books.
Oh, for sure. And the ending is epic. It is a huge battle worthy of all the films and time that led up to it. The stakes are incredibly high. The different timeline, Gamora trying to rationalize with her sister. What's her name? I just blanked
Nebula.
on. Nebula. Yeah, Gamora and Nebula's relationship, and the complicated dealing. Anytime you open up the door with time travel, again, the nosebleeds just start happening. But it's actually juggled really well. I mean, I know I'm not supposed to utter the name Joss Whedon anymore. Joss Whedon. But would always compliment that he was really good at having a large cast and making you feel like everybody got pretty fair share of the narrative. Like, usually you didn't feel like anyone got too shortchanged. And in a movie this size, and I think that's why it sprawled to 3 hours, they just refused to shortchange anyone. They just outright refused to shortchange everyone. And that made the movie quite epic. But yeah, at this point, I think they knew, you know, nobody wanted to open against Avengers Endgame, right? Like,
and they, not that I'm defending the choice or whatever, but to make Thor out of shape and stuff, I was surprised at how well they kept that under wraps. In terms of like any of the material or stuff, like I had no sniff that you know, Chris Hemsworth had spent the bulk of that shoot in a suit. Like I was shocked.
Yeah, and Thor called him Lebowski, which made me laugh out loud. I know my wife didn't like the fat humor in the movie. It's like the last bastion of people that we're allowed to make fun of, but I don't know. I especially because it was Thor, and Thor is so about that sort of vanity kind of thing. It mostly worked for me.
Yeah. And that's why I kind of prefaced it with like I won't defend the decision itself, because there were a few lines where I was like, I don't know if that's the line you needed, but you're right. I think it's because of what Thor was and where he is on his journey that some people. But I love too where he's just so heartbreakingly wants to be the one who puts the gauntlet on to bring him back, because he feels like he's failed everybody so much at the end of the last movie.
Yeah. Well, and that seems to be Thor's lot in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, to have things taken from him and to suffer.
Yeah.
So,
but if you're like a god and you live as long as he does, it's bound to happen.
Yeah. I mean, again, as I said before, I think if you needed an exit point, this was it. But obviously, the adventures continue. But this definitely, I think, lived up to the hype in a way that it felt like it couldn't. Like, as much as I did make my complaints about it, and I do think that some of them are valid, it absolutely delivered, you know, in very cleanly in that way. Like, so really, I don't know what more Marvel has to prove going forward, and I think maybe that's the problem.
Yeah, I agree. Like, for me, it's more about like how are they going to do, and you know, they're starting to do it, and I haven't got caught up on all the Disney Plus stuff too, but like how are they going to take, it's not even so much about maybe some of the characters, say like a Moon Knight, that's more of like, for lack of a better word, a secondary or tertiary character, not as well known. But for me, it's more about how they're going to take some of these more recent creations like Ms. Marvel and like Thunderbolts, even though some of the Thunderbolts are other characters, how they're going to take these newer characters and incorporate them into the fabric of the story. For me, that'll be the interesting challenge to watch. It's like, all right, what are you going to do with this one? How are you going to make me care?
How do you follow this?
Yeah.
Boom.
What's up? We're just talking about the trip.
I'm here in St. Marco Polo's.
Oh, I think MJ really likes me. That reminds me when I first fell in love.
You're a very difficult person to contact, Spider-Man. This is Mr. Beck.
We could have used someone like you on my world.
Your world? Beck is from Earth, just not ours. The snap tore a hole in our dimension.
You're saying there's a multiverse?
We have a job to do, and you're coming with us.
There's gotta be someone else you can use. What about Thor?
Off-world.
Captain Marvel. Unavailable. But I'm just a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
Bitch, please, you've been to space.
What do you want, Peter?
I want to go back on my trip with the girl who I really like and tell her how I feel. MJ, I
am Spider-Man.
No, of course I'm not.
I mean, it's kind of obvious.
You're right, you may not be ready, but this is my responsibility.
Saving the world requires sacrifice.
Sometimes people die.
Oh my God.
I just always feel like I'm putting my friends in danger. The world needs the next Iron Man.
You going to step up or not?
Out of here! Get on the jet! Who are you? I work with Spider-Man. You work for Spider-Man? I work with Spider-Man, not for Spider-Man. New plan!
So Spider-Man Far From Home, I think much like we talked about with Ant-Man and the Wasp, was a very necessarily downshifting of the gears, you know. Endgame had impossibly high stakes and impossibly high body count. We have the trauma of losing Tony Stark and retiring Captain America. And so Spider-Man, having lived through all of that and returned from this snapping, is going on a school trip to Europe. Gonna go to some museums, gonna hang out with his girlfriend and his bestie, and it's gonna be good, clean fun, and they're all gonna have a great vacation. Roll credits. No. Enter Jake Gyllenhaal as a very different interpretation, at least in my memory, of Mysterio. My memory is that Mysterio was a magician and they did have the powers to do these crazy things, but in this version, he's a tech genius who actually used to work for Tony Stark, and he can create these illusions with these projecting, I don't know, camera apparatuses that are actually capable of doing physical damage within the world, and then he can show up and save the day, quote unquote. He wants to get his hands on some of the Stark technology, specifically the Spider-Man suit and the AI technology which runs the Spider-Man suit. So he's got a very clear line and goal, and I think that Jake Gyllenhaal has a good time playing both sides of the character. Like, when he needs to be the likable hero character that you know the teenagers are looking up to, he's kind of good at playing that role. But there's an underside to it, like you can see it in the performance. And when he shows his hand that he's a dick, when he goes back to playing the nice guy role, you can see that thing underneath it was self-disgust. He hates playing the nice guy. He hates the falseness of it. He hates pretending that he's weak or not anything other than this genius character. But he's kind of, in that way, an intellectual villain. And we haven't really seen that a lot in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They're usually conquerors, destroyers, you know. This guy has a personal vendetta against Tony Stark, but Tony Stark's dead. He can't do anything about it. So he's just going to use Tony's tech to make the world his own playground. So yeah, like I was saying with Ant-Man and the Wasp, this does feel like a one-off adventure, and a fairly fun, escapist one-off adventure. But just like I said before, coming off of Endgame, this feels like a pretty slight meal by comparison. But if they made Endgame every time, we would be exhausted. Like, it would be too much. It would be too much. So sometimes a light, fun, maybe kind of disposable superhero adventure is all you need. And that's, at the end of the day, all this one is. Compared to the first one, which was setting the table and bringing Spider-Man into the Marvel Universe, and the third one, which is kind of epic in what it's attempting to do, this one is a sliver of a meal. But I enjoy the vibe, I enjoy the humor, I enjoy the adventure, and at least he's not the most amazing villain, but give Mysterio this, he's different.
Yeah, just building on that, that's the biggest issue I have with this movie, and it's not in his performance, Jake Gyllenhaal's performance. It annoys me in films and plays in general when someone is tasked with playing a villain or someone who's being untruthful, and it's unknown to the audience up to that point. So your task is to be, well, no, they don't know yet, so you have to be as believable as possible.
Yeah.
And then the moment comes in the film where, like, he takes off and he kind of does his, like, evil laugh. And, like, oh, we got it, everybody. And you realize that he's got this crew and blah, blah, blah. And from that moment on, whenever he's forced or in a position to then have to put that mask back on, he's terrible at doing it.
Right.
And it's not his acting. It's a device of the storytelling where, well, the audience is in on it now, so we can watch him be bad at it because they know. Fuck that. I would rather see him be brilliant at lying again at the end, instead of having Nick Fury go, well, that's some bullshit right there.
Yeah. He does throw that Hail Mary pass.
Changes. Gyllenhaal's but his acting changes. And for me, it's not enough to say, like, well, the stakes, it's at the end, he's losing control, he's doing whatever he can. Because now, as we roll forward, we know that, well, he records this thing and he lets out Peter Parker's identity and all this stuff. And again, it's not anything that Gyllenhaal is able or not able to do. I see it with plays all the time. Like, I talk about it because I work with Shakespeare so much. Villains like Richard III and Iago. It's like, just because the audience knows that they're lying, you cannot then portray them as bad liars, because then it makes all the other characters look like fucking idiots.
Commit to the bit.
Sticks in my craw.
Commit to the bit and let your character commit to the bit. I get that. I feel like him outing Peter Parker at the end, he knew things were going south, and that was just what can I do to fuck this guy back at this point? He was pretty convincing because he needed to be convincing at that point. I absolutely understand what you're saying, and to a degree agree with it, but I also like that they legitimately took a crew of people that were in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and did get yelled at by Tony Stark or people from Tony Stark Industries, and they brought them back for this movie. Like, they were one-scene roles or tertiary characters from, like, 8 movies ago who, like...
I love it that it's the dude from Iron Man 1 is the guy who's there, like, controlling the drones. Like, that's him.
Yeah. Tony Stark built this in a cave, right? All these poor put-upon guys who we have seen but not really registered because, you know, they're just there to get yelled at and scurry off and fix the tech. And, in a weird way, they're emblematic of, like, well, problematic things with science fiction and fantasy things generally. They're the people who solve the imaginary problems. The blah blah blah's not working. Oh, well, I can wire the blah 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 to the blah 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 and all will be well again. Well, do it, you fool! Like, those are the type of forgettable roles, or the secondary characters. The TV show Community did an episode where all the background characters celebrated that the main characters were on vacation. They could finally breathe. Something that they did mattered now. I just like that idea. Like, nothing is off the table. Like, they will go as far back as they can and take the smallest bit role character and find a way to plug them into a new story and reuse them. And I don't know, that pleased me. So totally. I let that kind of balance out the unevenness of, I don't think, I agree with you. I don't think it's the performance. I think that was in the script. Like, once the mask slipped and we saw it, it sort of stayed down, and that might have been a mistake. And
I would like to, exactly. I would like to see it be able to go back up when it needed to go up, and then let it come off, but I'm not in a position to do it anymore. That said, too, it sounds like I'm really shitting on it. I still, like, I do really, really enjoyed this movie. Like, a lot of those illusion sequences were really, really fantastic and interesting, and you're right, it is a different take on Mysterio. It's like, he was like, I think at one point, like, a theater, like, if not a magician, like, at one point he was like a stuntman. Like, he was into this idea of illusion, in that I'm making you see something that's not real.
Right.
So I love how they take that riff of, it's still about illusion, but it's just this tech-based illusion.
Yeah, and the illusions that can have real-world repercussions. Because otherwise he's fighting smoke, or it's all a dream, which can be interesting but hurts your stakes, right?
Yeah.
They build the relationship.
And maybe... Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say they build a relationship between he and his girlfriend and his buddy more in this movie. They are completely... Well, she discovers his secret, necessarily, and It really bonds the three, which helps set up things for the next movie nicely. And it didn't feel like some of the things in some of the previous movies we talked about jammed in. It felt like their involvement of the story made sense organically. Like, he was trying to get FaceTime with his girlfriend, and he kept on being pulled away by this adventure. And she wanted to be with him, so she's like, what's the problem? And ends up chasing him into the story. And a lot of times it's really clumsy, or she gets kidnapped by the villain, you know? They didn't do that. Thank you.
Yeah. And we'll see what the payoff will be too, but like, you know, like, oh wow, that Skrull reveal at the end, and so I'm kind of holding judgment on what that means. Like, I when they kind of read like, oh, Nick and Nick's actually off in space or whatever, and it was the Skrulls that were in place of, and this idea of like, well, how long have the Skrulls been here, and how long has been Nick up in space, and
when is it Nick and when is it not, and how do we know? And
yeah, exactly.
After a point, does it matter?
Like, I didn't like the reveal of like, well, are we undoing a bunch of stuff that we've seen? But that might all get explained when they finally get to doing the actual Secret Invasion show. And
I will give it, it's like that was a post-credit sort of throwaway thing. They didn't slow down anything that was happening in the story to do that. So I will give it a pass. But yeah, we'll just have to wait and see on that.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say?
No, he's great. He's a great Spider-Man. It's fun to watch a younger actor get to play it. Not that I had a problem with Tobey Maguire doing it or Andrew Garfield. Like, no problem at all. But
they're just not teenagers.
He just gets really good at it.
Yeah, and they're not teenagers. Spider-Man was always a teenager. That was kind of the thing that stood out about him, is that he really was just a kid under all of that power. And this movie remembers that.
I do think it's funny now that all three of the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies have now come out in between Guardians 2 and when Guardians 3 will finally come out. We had the full Spider-Man trilogy in between those two movies.
It'll be worth it. It'll be worth it.
You won't win. I've always found it best not to look into the past.
Okay, you got a plan, or shall I just stay duck and cover?
My plan was to drive us away.
Well, your plan sucks.
At some point, we all have to choose between what the world wants you to be and who you are. I made my choice. I'm done running. Here's what's gonna happen.
Natasha, don't slouch.
I'm not slouching.
You're going to get a back hunch.
Listen to your mother.
Oh my God, this.
Up.
All right, enough, all of you.
I didn't say anything. That's not fair.
All right, here's our last review for this episode, Black Widow, directed by Kate Shortland. And this is the long waited for standalone Black Widow feature, which came out after her character died in Avengers Endgame. So obviously we're going backwards in time. This actually takes place immediately following Civil War, chronologically. Yeah. So she's kind of on the lam. She'd broken some laws. She's on the being hunted by the William Hurt's character. R.I.P. William Hurt, by the way.
The late great.
So she ends up reconnecting with her past. Her younger sister, played by Florence Pugh, who I am deeply charmed by as an actress, and this character particularly is quite a lot of fun. And she reconnects with her kind of a family that she'd once had way back in the halcyon days of the 1990s. I remember being a kid in the 90s thinking, someday when I'm old, I'm going to hear like a Muzak version of Smells Like Teen Spirit in an elevator, and I'm going to want to kill myself. Well, a really sort of dirgy ballad version of Smells Like Teen Spirit opens this movie, and the first act is steeped again in this 90s nostalgia that's been going on. And it's bittersweet for me, because like I say, it just, I see what you're doing it well, but you're making me feel old and sad right now, so stop it. I actually was surprised, because I'd heard a lot of lukewarm stuff about Black Widow, the movie, at how much I enjoyed the movie. But there's a pretty large but, because I think they forgot one crucial thing about the Black Widow character in the making of this movie. And that is this. Black Widow is not a superhero. She is a human being, right? If you prick her, she will bleed, okay? And by the end of this movie, where she's being thrown by explosions and falling out of the sky without a parachute and gliding through the debris and saving people during free fall before she figures out even how she's going to safely land. No. That's what a superhero does. That's a Thor sequence. That's an Iron Man sequence. That is not a Black Widow sequence. That is, like, even within the realm of Marvel, ludicrous. That said, do the nuts and bolts of the movie work for me? Actually, yes, they do. Until the, like, gobsmacking silliness of the legitimate climactic air battle at the end, I think it mostly works quite well. Which why that ending is kind of a letdown. I still was smiling and laughing just at sort of like the ludicrousness of it in a certain degree, but they kind of start in a place which feels tangible and real, and they end in a place that is none of those things. And that's kind of a less than inspiring journey overall. But Rachel Weisz as her mom, and the guy from Stranger Things, David Harbour, as this guy who's got this real ego and obsession with, he wants to think of himself as the Soviet mirror to Captain America, and, living in the past, the way the whole movie is. He wants to rekindle his former glory, or remind everybody of his former glory. All of that works. The dynamic between Florence Pugh and Scarlett Johansson, and the performance between the two of them, love it. I love that she calls her out on her superhero poses, and I love that they have the girly sister bond, even though they're trying, it seems, not to have it. They just love each other. They just do. Doesn't matter. Do they start fighting? Of course they do. And, are there catty back and forths? Of course there is. But it's well done. So, it's weird, because I guess I'd have to in the end say I'm a little mixed about the movie, but overall it actually was kind of different enough that I was excited and enjoyed watching it. I think it ends up somewhere in the middle of the list more than towards the bottom of this list for me, but I'd heard a lot of negative things, so I'm more than willing to hear a second opinion.
It's high for me, actually. Like, I really, really liked it. The stuff at the end didn't bother me as much, but as I listen to you talk to it, I'm like, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I totally get that point. That does make sense. And it's the double-sided coin of it. I love that they showed shit happening to her.
Yeah.
Like, when Taskmaster shows up and almost blows her off the bridge, like, what the fuck? Like, she didn't see it coming, right? Like, she's not always one step ahead of everybody, although she's one step ahead of Thunderbolt Ross. There's moments where she's surprised and never, but then sometimes some of those falls that she takes, like when she falls into shit, I'm like, oh, that looks brutal. But then I'm like, how does she get up? Because you're right, she's not a superhero. So I love that they show her getting hurt, but then sometimes it's so much that you're like, how the hell does she keep getting back up? Yeah. That aside, it really felt like the same realm as like Winter Soldier for me.
Right.
Like, it's more the espionage type take on stuff, because they're not superheroes, with the exception of Red Guardian a little bit, and then whatever Taskmaster has going on there. I liked that reversal. I know that got some blowback too, that like when the helmet came off, and like, oh, what, now they made Taskmaster a woman? I thought they did a great job of using that character from the comics in a way that really fit in nicely with this story arc.
Well, and it tied into Black Widow's red in her ledger, right?
Yeah, exactly. And give me Ray Winstone anytime.
Oh, yeah.
I'll just put him in every movie and I'll be happy.
I mean, he can play a really nice guy and he can play a really bad guy, but this is a really punchable guy. Like, he is super hateable in this movie, which is what you want out of your villain, right? Like, it's got to be satisfying to see him get his, finally get his payback.
I like how they kind of stepped up what happened to the Widows after Natasha gets out. Like, the whole idea of this kind of very specific kind of mind control that was not around when she was there, that kind of helps explain if you need it. Like, well, she got out, and after that happened, he kind of turned things up a notch. So it's like, no, it's not just like, oh, I want to get out and I'll leave.
Right.
I thought they moved that in really, really well. And I also, maybe it's a small thing, and I think it's in part because we get this movie after Black Widow sacrifices herself in Endgame, but in the credits, they don't have the big flashy animated credits like Scarlett Johansson, Black Widow, where things are silhouetted in like visual art, and it's like, nope, just roll the credits.
And she did.
And I appreciated that tone at the end in a way. It's like, because you get to watch her in this moment knowing what's to come. And also Julia Louis-Dreyfus in the end credit scene. Yeah, sure, I'll take that too.
I have not seen the Hawkeye TV series, but I guess we get more Florence Pugh in that as well. So I should probably get on that.
Yeah, you should.
Like I said at the beginning of the review, I was very charmed by Florence Pugh. I don't know if you've seen Midsummer.
I haven't.
She's amazing in that movie, and she's also amazing in this movie, but they're two very different things. So those are the first two things that I clocked, at least seeing her in, and I'm impressed. Here's a question, though. The whole Red Room assassin training thing. The fact that once they finished their espionage, in America and they came back, that the mother and father handed these two girls over to that school and basically walked away from them for years, kind of, I think, detracts from the strong family bond that they're trying to maintain here. Especially when you learn that they have, like, forced hysterectomies as part of it, and that a significant percentage don't survive the training. And it's not like they were hanging out at Christmas time or visiting their parents in the in-between. I thought that was a weird choice, a weird kind of dehumanizing choice. Like, if the whole movie's about this family recovering the bond, then I think a conversation, at the very least, is owed there.
Yeah, like, maybe you can cut Melina, Rachel Weisz's character, a little bit of slack because she's been shot in the plane and she's kind of carted off right away.
Yeah.
But Red Guardian, like, David Harbour's there talking the kids down, setting them up so they can come in and give them the tranquilizers. Like, that's
That's not bad parenting. That's evil.
Find out that he's been thrown into prison, but we don't know what that timeline is. So, like, yeah.
I just think from a writing standpoint, I would have either changed that or I would have acknowledged that moment, because that's no small thing. That was the moment that the family separated, and the Florence Pugh character, she was younger, so it was more traumatic for her. But Scarlett Johansson seemed to know this was coming, and I feel like she should kind of have more resentment for her parents than she actually does in the movie. I mean, I guess in the end of the day, I remember asking a friend who'd been really ill-treated by his parents how he dealt with it, and he just answered, "They're my parents."
Yeah.
There's no other answer, right? Like, the most important thing to remember about your parents is that there's nothing you can do about them. So.
Well, and I guess maybe that's part of it too from them. I'm not trying to defend it, because I do agree with you. It's like, they're not their parents. Like, she doesn't know who her real parents even are. But I guess it's the closest thing that she was able to have to it. So maybe that's definitely, because I know some people who are way more attached to their found or forced family than their biological family. So.
Oh yeah.
But in terms of the mom and dad, maybe it's easier for them. It's like, well, they're not our kids.
Yeah. But like the movie narratively wants us to believe that they care about them too. So I don't know. It's just strange.
Yeah.
Changing the subject though, watching it with my kids, there was a scene that really, really upset my younger son. Can you guess what it was?
The pig?
It was Rachel Weisz playing with this pig. They're learning about mind control is really evil. And again, the fact that she's involved with the mind control studying when she and her daughters have been victims of it. So gross. But yeah, she has this pig that she asks to stop breathing. And then she continues having the conversation and the pig gets shaky and the pig falls over. And I saw my son's hand went to his chest. He did not like that at all.
Yeah.
She saves the pig. But it's a strange moment. Like,
yeah, because the response is like, oh, they still had a few seconds before it would have been anything serious. I think, and maybe I'm just kind of talking this out loud in the moment. I haven't thought about it too much, but like at first I felt like in terms of standalone movies, especially ones that go and do stories retroactively to fit stuff in, I feel like it's far more successful than Captain Marvel. But then I wonder now, as I'm thinking that out loud, that is that in part because we've had more time with Black Widow in the other movies, and so we feel like we know Black Widow better, that we can go back and do this little fill-in one-shot, and I felt like it was a more successful job because we just have more stuff to fill in for the character.
It has elements of being an origin movie, but it's not an origin movie. It's a standalone Black Widow adventure, and it benefits from that. Yes, absolutely. Is that good enough on Black Widow? Is there anything else you wanted to say about ScarJo's farewell from the Marvel Cinematic Universe?
I'm curious to see, because there was some, legal stuff that happened with the release because of COVID, and it was like Disney Plus and movie theater, and did that break contract? And it seems like all that stuff is sorted out. I'm curious to see, and I hope that even if it's not like her character, but she's been a part of these movies and so many of them, I really hope that she's involved going forward. Like whether that's as a producer or like, I don't know if she'd ever direct. I've never gotten any indication from print material or interviews that that's something that interests her, but I wonder if there's a way that she's still actually going to be involved in some of these movies, even if it doesn't mean some kind of return in a multiverse angle or something like that.
Well, and again, these are doors that have been kicked down. If ScarJo wants back in, she can come back in.
They'll find a way.
Yeah.
They'll do like a further prequel, or they'll do a different prequel.
Or, another version of her, or like it's, again, like where we started with this episode, death kind of doesn't matter in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But, I don't know, I thought this one was underrated.
Yeah, I really, really liked it. And loved watching with my kid. Like, for them to watch a really strong female taking the lead on it, like, yeah, it's pretty satisfying. And
in a way, like, that never occurred to me in Captain Marvel, right? But it occurred to me all the time in Black Widow.
And I think it's because she's the only woman in the Avengers, and she's finally getting her own movie.
Maybe. We just knew her
Hawkeye
more.
didn't get a movie, but he eventually got a TV show, so he did get his time to shine eventually. But everyone else had their own stuff. She didn't, so maybe that's why it feels a bit more satisfying.
She was due, and she got her due, damn it. So that was yet another 6 Marvel Cinematic Universe films ranked, reviewed, about to be ranked. Thank you so much, Skye, for being here. I know you're a busy man, all these theatrical obligations, and you got to have a vacation with the fam. And here I am, just gumming up the works with this podcast. But the love in the garage is big right now. Thank you so much for being here.
Love it.
What was your least favorite of this group of 6 and why?
Captain Marvel was my number 6. I think in part just because it was just some of the retroactive things where they tried to give it weight in a way that it didn't. Again, none of these movies did I dislike. I liked them all and enjoyed watching all. So it's trying to find reasons of well, why is it lower on the list than others,
right?
Or why is it higher? So for me, yeah, it was a good introduction, but it just felt shoehorned in a way. And maybe I'll feel differently when we get more Captain Marvel story to find out what they were doing in some of these, stretches of time, if that's even relevant to what's coming down the pipe. But that was the kind of the main reason why it was my 6.
Okay. Respect.
Number 5?
Yes, please.
Ant-Man and the Wasp. I think mainly because it just kind of felt very much like the setup of other things. As much as I enjoyed it, it felt like man, it sounds like I'm complaining, but I don't mean it to. They successfully took a lot of the elements from the first movie and did them again in the second. I found very entertaining, but it's it's this kind of mix of the stuff they already did that's making me happy, and I'm getting set up for stuff. Apart from getting more Evangeline Lilly as the Wasp, it just kind of feels like, it's just more of the same. Thank you. I enjoyed that.
Fair enough.
Number 4, Spider-Man Far From Home. Loving the Spider-Man trilogies, but I think it's just that villain thing that's just sticking in my craw that just makes it a little bit lower than some of the other ones. I enjoyed the tone of the Spider-Man movies. Tom Holland's great. I just wish they didn't do that to Jake Gyllenhaal, because I don't think it's his fault. My number 3, Black Widow. I really, really enjoyed it, especially of all the ones that had to come after Endgame. I know it's just the 2 of them, I guess, but maybe it was because it got delayed because of COVID. I don't know, but in terms of a movie being able to stand on its own and not have to be necessarily tied to other stuff, it was really, really successful. And I just loved the spy genre feeling, which leaves me with the 2 Avengers movies as my 1 and 2. I don't disagree with you in terms of how Infinity War maybe is in some ways structurally the better film, but it's my number 2 and Endgame's my number 1 only because of the payoff.
Right.
I just love how they brought all the threads together, and I totally geeked out, but those moments at the end with the portals and Cap picking up Mjolnir and Tony sacrificing himself was totally worth sitting through the denouement of everything after that, just to have that final epic battle and to have all those characters on the screen at the same time, and to holy smokes, they pulled it off.
Payoff after payoff after payoff after payoff. Yeah.
And still then being able to set up a few, or planting a few seeds. You're okay, well, we're obviously going to follow that because now Gamora's back, even though it's a different Gamora. So how's that going to pay off, and where's Thor going to go? And so I felt like it was a really great way of ending stuff and also setting up what was to come.
That is a very good list, and dude, we are so close. We're so ridiculously, terribly, unbelievably close, but alas, that does not a cigar make. Let's start an agreement. I actually did put Captain Marvel at the bottom of the list as well. I kind of felt like Captain Marvel and Black Widow were supposed to be in the opposite spots as far as other people's reaction to them and mine. And again, it's not that I thought it was terrible, but it doesn't have the bounce and the charm of your Ant-Man or your Spider-Man movies, and it definitely suffers from origin movie-itis. I agree with you wholeheartedly that now that this movie's out of the way, it'll be interesting to see how things move going forward. But of this group of movies, I guess it ended up being the least interesting. To continue agreeing with you, Ant-Man and the Wasp is in 5th position. A very fun, very palatable, one-off adventure. I mean, welcome Michelle Pfeiffer into the fold. I've been a fan of hers since the 80s, and it's great to see her, and she's well matched with Michael Douglas, and two great actors being well used. And a lot of the times, I mean, we'll see again how much they focus on these characters going forward, but sometimes they have the flashy casting and they don't do much or enough with them, and in this case I think everybody got their money's worth. 4th position, we're just agreeing so much it's boring at this point, is Spider-Man Far From Home. Again, the charm factor is there, the setting up for what's going to be coming is nice, but it doesn't feel like it's really self-consciously plugged into the movie. It grows organically out of the story. It's a fun Spider-Man adventure. I think if I was ranking it with the other Spider-Man movies, it would maybe rank lower, but in this list it kind of fell into the middle. Still in agreement, in 3rd position, Black Widow. I know. Yes, it was a long time coming for this movie. It's kind of unfortunate that Scarlett Johansson felt the need to just sue Disney to get more money out of this movie. I don't know, just for me, Scarlett Johansson's been working in movies since she's 13 years old. Like, I'm sure she's doing fine. I know that she didn't make as much money from Black Widow as she would have liked, but I just don't have this idea that she's suffering in any way. But the movie was a good send-off, like, fairly well to the Black Widow character. We may or may not see more of her, but I mean, if this was it was good. And in the absence of Black Widow, we have now these 3 new characters who have their own charms to sort of come into it. And it could also be because I guess I'd heard some stink about the movie. When I went in, my expectations were lowered, and as a result, I was pleasantly surprised. But yes, where we switched is the 2-part Avengers. I do think Infinity War is significantly better than Endgame, while thinking that both of them are amazingly entertaining. I just think Endgame is kind of unwieldy in its size, and there are, like I say, a rat frees Ant-Man from the microverse, and Iron Man invents time travel overnight. There are things in the movie that I can definitely point to as problematic. But as far as this huge epic cinematic payoff, does it bring the goods? Yes. But for me, Endgame is in 2nd place, and Infinity War is top of the pile this particular episode. But I don't think we're going to fight too bad over this. We basically agreed. And let's be real, in some way, Infinity War and Endgame is really one huge movie in some ways. Like,
actually, I remember when they first announced a slate of movies, like at a Comic-Con thing years ago, it actually was Infinity War Part 1 and Infinity War Part 1 and Part 2.
There you go.
And then they decided to, like, no, because of as they wrote them, I guess they felt like the things had shifted, and then it kind of felt like, yes, it's the 2nd part, but it feels like it's its own thing. And then they got to be cheeky and coy about what's it going to be called, because then they didn't announce it until they dropped a trailer.
We'll tell you when we're good and damn ready to tell you. Thank you so much, Skye.
I love it. I love chatting movies in general, and the Marvel ones always make me happy. So happy to keep doing it.
Right on. Well, I'm off to have a Spanish adventure in September, but maybe I'll get in touch with you a little like when's Wakanda Forever coming out?
It's November.
So maybe in the new year, sometime in the new year, we can do this all again.
Yeah.
When you're not completely busy.
No, that'll be by the time we get into December and into New Year, it'll be a bit easier because I'll still be like maybe teaching one class, but I won't be doing like the Persephone gig and teaching. So things will be a bit crazy for the first bit. Yeah.
Well, I look forward to it. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on the multiverse and your thoughts on, the future of Marvel Cinematic Universe. I ain't sick of it yet. Just because I was pointing out that it's deeply flawed doesn't mean I'm not going to consume like a little pig. And so there is Rankn Review 215, done with and over. I hope you enjoyed that exploration of Marvel, because there's more to come in Rankn Review Future. Big love and big thanks to Skye Brandon for being there, and big love and big thanks to your ears for being there. Send your feedback to ranknreview@gmail.com. That's ranknreview@gmail.com. The website's at ranknreview.ca. I try to drop every other Wednesday, and much thanks and much love from your host and random Canadian, Larry Parsons. We'll talk to you real soon.